Shabbat Shalom. Everyone, it is so good for me to be back. Those of you may know, I have been in another world after the pathogen hit me, and I have recovered, and I am so glad to be among the living. I'm so glad to be among my brethren and sisters. I'm so glad to be with you that I'm looking at through this camera that's looking at me through the lens of your screens. And I say welcome and good Sabbath to you all. For all who are parties to the covenant, born into the covenant, I say Shabbat Shalom and good Shabbos. For those who have been engrafted from all the nations into this beautiful covenant, into this lifestyle, I say welcome, and it's so good to see you. We're old friends and brothers and sisters, and now we are family. And for those of you who are merely seeking to find the way of life, the ways of the Creator of the universe, the ways of life, health, and peace, I say thank you for coming and thank you for joining us and being with us today. And for those even who are here out of curiosity or perhaps even to mock, I welcome you and I thank you for being willing to join in our conversations today about the Creator of the universe and His grand plan. And that grand plan is for the redemption of mankind as a species. He's going to do it bloodline by bloodline and household by household, as well as individual by individual. And He's also going to restore creation to its original intended state, the Edenic state of beauty, of fruitfulness, of shalom, and of harmonious inner working. And that's the grand plan, and that's what's happening. And all the things that we see around us, all the things that everyone else talks about, all the things that the talking heads of the news and the political realm and the ideological realm want to talk about, those are all just backmasking. Those are all just the things, the events that lead into the grand plan being fulfilled. So what we do on this day, as most of you already know, what we do on the Sabbath is we dig into the treasure chest. We are all on a treasure hunt. We seek to find the treasure of that which is holy, that which is empowering, that which is life-giving, that which is health in restoring, that which is joy instilling. And the holy things are just beyond the veil. Just beyond the veil. It's like I used to go to my grandmother's house when I was young. And we didn't live in where she lived, so we had to make a long trip to get there. We only went there twice a year. And so on the morning of the first day after we got there, my grandmother would reach and she'd go pull out this canvas bag that she had treasures and treats in it. And we didn't know, she could bring the bag to each of us children. I was the youngest of the children, so I got the last until she liked me better. Anyway, she would bring the canvas bag, and you couldn't see what was in it. You just took your hand and you reached your head, your wide-eyed child, looking for, knowing this was something great, and there could be anything. There were silver dollars in there. Then there was candy. There were different books. There were all sorts of things that were precious to her. There was even things from the old country, from Poland and from Germany, that were letters and things like that she would. And so you didn't know what you were going to get when you reached into the bag. But you had that sense of mystery, that sense of hope. And you reached into the bag as a child. I did. I reached in the bag and I'd grab whatever I would put my hand on first. And I would just pull it out and be amazed that there was something transcendent in that bag. Well, that's what we do with Shabbat. That's what we do with the Sabbath, the seventh day, Saturday, Friday night at sundown through Saturday night at sundown. We're like little children. And we come like little children to our Zayda or our Saba, or our abuela, if you're Spanish. Well, we come into the precious realm of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and they provide from the other side of the veil. They provide something holy, something precious, something transcendent to us. And our job is to take it and inspect it and to review it and to dig out all the holiness and all the goodness from it. And so every week we come and we find a new bag has been brought out to us. And this week, it's the bag labeled Miketz. Miketz. It's a Hebrew word. It's usually translated as at the end. Perhaps we'll talk about why that's not perhaps the best translation, but nevertheless, we're going to live with that for right now. At the end. And so what we're doing is we're going to the veil and we're seeing this bag of treasure marked at the end. Do you understand what I just said? We're going to the end, and we're going to dig into what's at the end, and we're going to bring it out, and we're going to review it for ourselves. We're going to bring it into today's world. The things we're going to read about are the things that are at the end. The whole idea of Miketz is that he has now shifted from the basic narrative of the patriarchs and the matriarchs and their learning process, their learning curve of how to get into the covenant and walk in the covenant and overcome the obstacles and the challenges of failure of the covenant and be restored. We've been through all that, and now we're in the last three parshas, Miketz being the first of the last three. We have Miketz, Vayegash, and Vayeki, and this is the prophetic epilogue of the book. Each book of the Torah has a opening introduction that gives you some basic ideas of what you're going to need to know to get into the story. Then it has the story, and the story is like a wave that flows. It comes up, it reaches a crescendo, it begins to come back down, and then at the end of that process you have a prophetic epilogue. Well, this is the prophetic epilogue. Here we are. Welcome. Reach into the bag. Get your hands ready. Get your hearts ready. Get your spirits ready. We're going to reach into the bag that says at the end. And what will we find? And what will be there? And what will be its impact upon our lives? And how will we adjust what we're thinking and how we're reacting to the world around us and the events that we see happening? How will we change the way we react to those things by virtue of what we find when we dig into that bag? That treasure chest that has been prepared for us from our patriarchs and matriarchs. Miketz, parsha number 10. It begins in English with the words, and then it came to pass at the end. And then it came to pass at the end. Vayehi Miketz. Well, that's where it is. So then it came to pass at the end. Now, I told you that at the end may not be the actual best translation. It's something that English speakers, English translators did in the King James era to take the Hebrew word Miketz and try to make it fit into their English Western mindset. But the first problem you're going to find with Miketz and at the end comparing is in Miketz there's no the, there's no definite article. This is not about the end. This is about end. This is about something, and katz is not really end. It's about a process of straining the like you strain a vegetable or a juice or something like that. You strain the vegetable or the fruit out of the juice so you have the pure juice. This is about the straining, the cleansing, the purification, the readying for use. This is about, so what we're going to be reading about is about our being made ready for use, for the most ultimate use, for the significant purpose of which we were brought here on earth as the covenant people and as engrafted souls into this covenant. Why are we here? To fulfill the grand redemptive plan of the Holy One, to redeem mankind as a species, and to restore creation to its original intended state of beauty, fruitfulness, and shalom. If you want to get a good picture of what ketz, the second part of Miketz, the m, the mem, is a prefix, which basically means coming out of, bursting forth from, as a wave flowing out of, and then out of what? Ketz. And again, ketz is the straining process, but it's like if you picture an hourglass. Anyone seen an hourglass? I think you probably have. We've all seen an hourglass, and there's two bulbs in an hourglass. There's an upper bulb, and there's a lower bulb. And between the upper bulb and the lower bulb of the hourglass, there is a fulcrum. There is a narrow, straining passageway that allows only a few grains of sand in the hourglass to go through from the top into the bottom. Now that is what ketz means, that fulcrum between the upper bulb and the lower bulb, that place at which we change the atmosphere changes, the flow changes, everything begins to shift. There's a paradigm shift, and we are at the stage. Torah wants to talk to us today, wants to hold open the bag and say, take a handful, take a treasure out of this fulcrum of the hourglass. The readings are Genesis 41, verse 1 through chapter 44, verse 17. Now, we're going to go through the veil. The next 3 chapters are all looking not just at the past, because to a covenant person, the past is your training program for the future. To the nations who are outside and estranged of their own will from the covenant, the past will be repeated itself. It will just repeat itself. But not for the covenant people and those who are engrafted into the covenant. The goal of the Torah is to teach us how to take the past and bring out of the past a way, an understanding, a level of wisdom, a level of recognition of what's there, so we can navigate through, and the past we will not repeat, we will overcome. So that is the idea of where we are. We are going through the veil as if we're time traveling, going to the end so that we can bring forth knowledge, wisdom, and understanding so we can navigate through the times that everybody else will call the tribulation, the times everybody else will call time of Jacob's trouble, the times that everybody else will call the end of days, the latter days. We will have the key to negotiate and navigate through those processes if we will go through the veil. We do it with the book of Genesis. There's a different perspective on the veil and what's behind the veil in Exodus at the end of its chapters, in Vayekel and Pekudei. That's the prophetic outlaying of Exodus. Then you get into book of Leviticus, and you're going to find this beyond the veil level in Bahar and Bechukotai, the last 2 parshas of Leviticus. When you get to Numbers, it'll be Matot and Maseh. And when you get to Deuteronomy, the culmination of it all, the last of the 5 previews of the end of days will be Nitzavim Vayelek, will be Ha'azinu, will be Vezot HaBracha, and we end with the great blessing. Well, that's how the world will end. Now, these 5 previews of the end of days are given to us, and right there in the Torah. We're going through the veil today. We're going to time travel for the first time, cross the threshold of time, and gaze into the mysteries of the latter days through the eyes of our patriarchal, covenantal relationships. All right. Every year, this particular parsha coincides with a season of time that offends many. I understand. I don't want you to be offended. But if you are, I recognize your offense, and it's okay. This time of Hanukkah, this time of Miketz corresponds every year with this 8 days of radical rededication and recommitment that we have come to call Hanukkah, which means dedication or rededication. It's like in Hebrew, shuv means to turn or to return, because it's all the same thing. We're all coming back, and we're all coming back to the same place. When you return to the Holy One, the Creator Himself, and to His pathway, His ways, and to His Word and to His covenant. And the same thing with regard to dedicate. When we rededicate, we don't rededicate to something new. We rededicate to what we were dedicated to before. And so this time of radical rededication that we are in coincides with the fact that we can grab something out of the end of days, out of the previews. Now, what we find out is that the first shock of this going into the future is that the people we thought were going to be our enemies are there, but they're not our worst enemies. Brethren, I do not wish to depress you, and I will tell you that this ends well. But when we first step into that realm of the end of days, we will find out that our worst enemies are not the beast, not the whatever you want to call him. They're not the minions. They're not the false prophet. They're not the wolves. The worst enemy that we will have will be from our own kin. It will be from our own covenant people. There will be renegades. There will be those who turn against us. This is the story of Hanukkah, and this is the story of Joseph. Who were his worst enemies? It wasn't Potiphar. It wasn't Potiphar's wife. It wasn't Pharaoh. Who were his worst enemies? And it's Joseph's story and the Hanukkah story and the end of days story are all one. And so as we, first shock that we get as we enter into this realm of time travel is that some of the people that we thought were our friends, some of the people that we thought were on our side, some of the people we thought were on the Holy One's side, and that proclaimed that they were and declared that they were, will be the worst offenders, the worst persecutors, the worst oppressors of us all. You know, if you read the books of the Maccabees and you begin to feel anger toward the Greeks or the Syrians and the armies who came against us, you have missed the point of the Maccabees. The story of the Maccabees is the real problem was those among us who accepted the ways, who bought into the lies, who then adopted the practices, who took on the practices of the heathen, of those who hate the covenant and hate the Holy One, and then began to be the most radical enemies of us all. And so we find out that this is our first shock. Some of the ones that you think are your dear confidants. And I think, you know, the Holy One has his ways of reviewing and revealing who those people might be. And he reveals it in stages. And so when you begin to see people turning others in or complaining about other people, about what they do or don't do on whatever is in the news, then you begin to see that the telltale signs are there. That you're this is someone you do not want with you in the struggles, in the trials, at the times we're trying to navigate through the toughest of the processes. Now we have that is a warning when you see them informing, when you see them mocking, when you see them scoffing. You have a short window of opportunity to try to change that approach because this is for their sake, not for yours. For their sake, they need to change that attitude, and they need to be approached with love, but with understanding and compassion for who they need to be or who they're called to be, as opposed to who they're acting like and whose ways they are adopting and accepting. All right. The Holy One is going to activate a paradigm shift. I just hear the director of a set, a stage, a movie, whatever the case may be, you know, lights, curtain, lights, camera, action, curtain. But I hear the Holy One say, activate paradigm shift. How does the Holy One change our viewpoint? How does he change our perspective? He takes us into the future. He takes us into the end. He begins to reveal to us how this is going to turn out so we know how we're supposed to deal with it now. The covenant community, as we start Parsha Miketz, as we start Genesis 41, the covenant community, the household of Jacob, has ceased moving forward. Momentum has stopped. Divine encounters have stopped. Joseph is languishing in prison in Egypt for a crime he would not ever commit, on a false accusation. He was in Egypt in the first place. Oh, my story. Oh, what a story. This is the story because his brothers turned on him, because his brothers caught him, beat him, stripped him of his garment, of his precious family garment, the coat, called the coat of many colors in the English language. And they beat him and they threw him into an empty pit, and after that they sold him to the slave traders, and he went to Egypt and was bought, and that's how he got to Egypt in the first place. And so no wonder with this kind of hatred, this kind of animosity, this kind of then they told Yaakov what they tell Yaakov. They took the robe that they'd taken off of him. They killed one of their father's goats, which wasn't even theirs to kill. They killed one of their father's goats. They spilled the blood of that goat. They poured it all over the coat. They took it back. They didn't say, we saw it. They said, Haker nah. which means, do you recognize this? And, of course, they left him to think of his own thoughts. So he left Yaakov mourning, thinking that his son has been torn to pieces by wild animals, by a beast. And he has. He has been torn to pieces by a beast. His body's still alive, but his soul, his heart, has been torn apart by a wild beast. The wild beast that lives within the brothers themselves. And so we see that at the advent of Miketz, as we transition into this at the end process, we have to look around and say, this doesn't look good. The covenant's not happening. It's there, it's existing, it's not prospering. And so we have this process of the grand plan is not moving forward. And so we have to have a paradigm shift. Activate paradigm shift. And so in the bedchambers of a pagan king in Egypt, on one night, some say it was Rosh Hashanah, the Yom Teruah, first day of the civil year, of the human year. Some say it was that day, but we don't have it recorded for us in the script. But on one night, Pharaoh dreams. Well, let's read. Why don't we read a little bit of that? We're going to stand, if you would. This is our tradition in our fellowship here. And I will recite the blessing of the house. You can join me if you wish, if you know it. And then we will read from chapter 47. From Psalm 119, these words, "Open our eyes, O Holy One, that we may see wondrous things in your Torah. For we are but strangers in the earth. Do not hide your commandments from us. Our souls cry out for your judgments at all times, saying, how can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your Torah. For your word is a lamp to our feet, and it is a light to our path. The entrance of your word brings light and understanding to even the simple. So make our spirits now come alive, so that we can praise you. And may your judgments be our help." From Genesis 47:1 in the English translation. "Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river, and suddenly came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the aku, in the meadow it says in English. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, and they were ugly, and they were gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And then the ugly and the gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. And Pharaoh woke. But then he slept again, and he dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up out of one stalk plump and good. And behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. And so Pharaoh awoke again, and indeed it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and he called for the magicians, the magi of Egypt, and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. And then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with me and his servants, and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, We each had a dream one night. He and I, and each of us dreamed according to the interpretation or meaning of his own dream, and there was a young Hebrew man there with us. Young Hebrew man there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored to me my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, and he changed his clothing, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. And so Joseph answered Pharaoh, I should say, it's not in me. God, Elohim, will give you an answer of shalom. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Now I'm going to skip forward through his interpretation of the dream or his statements of the dream. I'm going to go all the way to the end of that process till Joseph's response. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. And the 7 good heads are 7 years. And the dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing that I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout the land of all of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. And even so, the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe, heavy. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And then that food will be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and the land will not perish during the famine. And so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this? A man in whom is the spirit of Elohim, the Ruach of Elohim? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You will be over my house and over all my people. All of them shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took the signet ring off his hand, and he put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in the garments of fine linen and a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the 2nd chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. And so he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Thank you. You may be seated. Paradigm shift. Tables have turned. The end of days is being foretold. The patterns are being established. The pathways are being hewn. The breach is being provided for us to pass through the times of trouble and trial. Now, this is fascinating because it involves both the Pharaoh, who will be, we'll understand to be the beast. The beast that we see repeated in prophetic books later on. The Pharaoh is the end-time beast. He's the prototype of the end-time beast. But we have this other character that's brought up at the same time, and that's the Joseph character. Who is Joseph prototypical of? Who are we seeing through the lens of Joseph? Who are we really seeing? Oh, he's been sort of whispered on the wind for the past 20-something generations. The Hebrews call him Mashiach. He's the seed of woman, prophesied in Genesis 3:15. The one who will crush the head of the serpent, even as his own foot is being bruised. The serpent, the Greeks called him Messiah, or they would have if they did known to. Many of the modern the nations that have joined and been engrafted call him Christ. But he is the one, the Messiah. Joseph is the image, the picture of the Messiah, the Mashiach figure. And so here we have these two balancing factors. We have the Mashiach, and he is correlated with the beast. And what do we see? It looks like that Mashiach is bowing to Pharaoh, but indeed, Mashiach is governing Pharaoh. Now, here's the thing about the beast. If you know, some animals you can train to to respond to your voice. You have a puppy that you train from youth, and you say, "Here, Fido," and that beast will come to you. That animal will come to you, come to your voice. Now, he wants something because he expects he's going to get fed, a treat, a pet. Something's going to happen to him. But nevertheless, you can train some animals to come to the sound of the voice and the calling. But not a cow. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the cow. In a lot of this whole story of Joseph and Pharaoh is the juxtaposition of Hebrew and Egyptian. The two languages are very similar, but the words mean different things. And so when you see Pharaoh in Egyptian, to Egyptians it means grand ruler, powerful, mighty one. To a Hebrew, paro means his cow. Par is actually his bull or his leader cow, his bell cow. The O at the end is the suffix which designates the masculine third person possessive. His. So the juxtaposition, every time the Egyptians would call Pharaoh, Joseph would have to giggle. Try not to show any emotion, try not to show any humor, because he's hearing his cow. He's talking about his being the creator of the universe. This is just the creator of the universe's cow, his beast. Now, here's the thing about the beast. The beast does not respond to the call and come willingly. The beast must be driven through a series of channels, through a series of narrowing passages to get to the place you want. How will the Holy One deal with Pharaoh? The way you deal with a cow, the way you deal with a beast. And that will take, those who go with Pharaoh will have to go through the same channels, the same passageways, the same things to get them to the destination, because they will not respond to the verbal call of the creator of the universe. Now, I look around this room and I look through this camera at my friends and those my strangers that I haven't met yet, friends that I haven't met yet, on the other side of this camera, and I say, have you responded? Have you responded to the voice? Are you willing to come to his call? If you're willing to come to his call, you see, we don't have to go through this level of straits, through the levels of the different channels of the working pins, and the traumas and the dramas that go along with that process, and the jostling that takes place. He said, I want you to come voluntarily. Come now. Come to my call. Come and don't be a beast. Don't be such a beast out there. Well, we have the beast and we have Pharaoh and we have Joseph, the Messiah figure. And if you only, a lot of people read prophecy and they think about the end days and they teach about the end days, but they only talk about the anti-so-and-so. They only talk about the beast. That's not the story. That is not the story of the latter days. That's not the story of how this all, the way life as we know it, the fulcrum point, it reaches its conclusion. The story is Mashiach leads the beast through the different pins, on through the different straits, and brings him to the ultimate conclusion. You'll see a bigger picture of this in the book of Exodus. Now, Joseph at one point is going to say to his father later in this whole sequence of prophetic events, Joseph is going to say that he's talking about himself, I have become as a father to Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't know that. Pharaoh will never understand that. Pharaoh just knows that he wants something done. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't know how to do it, so he has someone else do it, and Joseph takes that place. Well, I want you to get this picture. The first thing that the Holy One wants us to know about the days that are coming, the tribulation, the trials, the difficulties in the latter days, is that this is not a champion time for the beast. This is not when he gets his will done. This is whenever he is led through the straits, whenever he does what he does to get himself in such a place that the Holy One can lead him and the people that serve him through the straits. There is another, the real story is that the Mashiach was coming forth. This week, every parsha, every section of Torah that we read, like I said, this is 44:1 through 44:17, Parsha Miketz. Every parsha has a associated reading from the prophets. And in years when Hanukkah is not coinciding with Miketz, which is rare, but when that takes place, there is a parsha, there's a reading from the prophets we do around the time of the dedication of the temple, of Solomon. But during the years like this, when Hanukkah, the season of Hanukkah coincides with Miketz, we read a different portion. We begin with Zechariah 2:14, a portion from the prophets. I just want you to hear some of this prophecy, because I do not want you to fear the end of days. I do not want you to be stressed about this process. The whole idea of this passing through the looking glass, going through the veil, and finding things and taking these treasures from the future and from the holy things and the holiness is that we are able to process through and navigate through. So let me read you some of the haftarah for this week, from beginning with Zechariah 2:14. You'll recognize the Hebrew if you know any Hebrew songs. Roni v'simchi bat Zion. Sing, rejoice, daughter of Zion. Ki hinenu va. For behold, I am coming. V'shachanti v'kotot kach neum Adonai, and I will dwell, abide, and take up rest in your midst, says the Holy One. Many nations will join themselves to the Holy One on that day, and they will be my people. And I will dwell in your midst, and you will know that the Holy One of hosts has sent me to you. The Holy One will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land. He will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh before the Holy One, for he has roused himself for his holy home habitation. And then he showed me Yehoshua, the high priest, standing before the face of the angel of the Holy One. And there was the adversary standing at his right hand to oppose him. And the Holy One said to Hasatan, the adversary, the Holy One rebukes you, O Hasatan. The Holy One has chosen Jerusalem. He who has chosen Jerusalem rebukes you. Is not this man a brand plucked from the fire? And now Yehoshua was standing before the angel, dressed in filthy garments. So he said to those who stood before him, take off his filthy garments. And he said to him, behold, I remove from you your iniquity, and behold, I clothe you with a special robe that sets you apart. And I said, that's the prophet, have them set a tahor, or zanif tahor, a clean turban upon his head. So they set a zanif tahor on his head, and they clothed him with garments, clean garments, and the Holy One's angel stood by to serve. And the Holy One's angel charged Yehoshua, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, if, as, when, and to the extent you walk in my ways and keep my charge, you will also judge my house, and you will keep my courts. And I will give you free access among those who are standing by. That's the angels. Shemana, hear now, Yehoshua, high priest, you and your companions who sit before you, for they are prodigies. Behold, I will bring forth my servant, a zmach, a fruitful, flourishing branch, shoot, or offset. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Yehoshua, on one stone are 7 eyes or facets. Behold, I will engrave inscriptions on it, says the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of the land in one day. On that day, says the Lord of hosts, every man will invite his neighbor to come under the vine and under the fig tree. The angel who talked with me returned and woke me like a man who is wakened from sleep. He said to me, Ma'atah, what do you see? That ends at 4:2, but I wanted to read that to show you the correspondence between what's happening with Joseph in Egypt, being called forth, a brand plucked from the fire, out of the dungeon, out of the stench of death, and brought up forward, and then dressed in the clean robe, completely made ready. The prophet even wanting to have the turban of the high priest. He wanted holiness kadosh l'Adonai, holiness unto the Holy One on his head. And so we see this process, and we see how he's being given certain things. Not only will he cleanse the sin of the land in one day. Ah, that's a good news right there. It's good news. Then he will give this Mashiach figure, he will give him full reign over the nation. He will be in charge of his courts, and he will be able to judge the land. This is what's the real story of the process. All right. As part of this prophetic vision, we see a strange phenomenon that has repeated itself thus far and will continue to repeat itself throughout Scripture. Is that we have the one who will be the Mashiach figure has a first coming that doesn't end well, at least as the world sees it. And then he has a second coming, which is glorious and beautiful. This pattern has been shown from the time of Abraham. Abraham came to Israel the first time. It was a famine in the land. He had no impact. He had no real relevance to the process. He could not accomplish anything, and he had to go down to Egypt just to live. And then he came back. And when he came back, miracles began to follow him. Abundance began to flow out of him, and marvelous things. And the whole atmosphere of the land of Israel changed. And he became the judge, basically, as it were, or the king or the ruler of that nation, even though he had no tie to their culture, to their economy. Then you could go through the process. I could talk about Yitzhak. Yitzhak, this first coming of Yitzhak, he went voluntarily to Mount Moriah, to the place where he would die, and he went as if he was never going to come back. But yet the second coming, he comes to the different places, Gerar, and he begins to flourish and prosper in ways that bring a blessing to all the peoples there and the nations. We could go forward into Yaakov. Yaakov, his initial appearance in the household of faith. Jacob. Hey, it doesn't look so pretty, right? You know, all the arguments over the birthright and all the jostling with Esau, and Yitzhak he seems to actually prefer Esau to Jacob in this process. And so he sent off into banishment, into exile up in Haran, and he goes through trials, and he comes back. But when he comes back, you see, Yaakov is suddenly the head of the patriarchal line. And so that's just the beginning of this process. We'll later see this also with David. David, when David first comes, he's a little shepherd boy. And yeah, he has a couple of good days, and he kills a Goliath, he kills a giant. But then the next thing he knows, he's hunted, he's hated, he has to hide out. He has to go and hide in caves. And that's his first coming. That's how the first coming winds up. But the second coming, whenever he begins to come back forth, and first of all, the tribe of Judah anoints him and positions him as king. And beyond the tribe of Judah, then he expands to the other tribes. He becomes king at Hebron over all the nation of Israel. And he begins to establish Jerusalem as the capital of the kingdom. Well, you see, that's his second coming. The first and second comings of Avram, the first and second comings of Yitzhak, the first and second comings of Yaakov, first and second comings of Joseph now is where we are. And we'll go into David and on beyond in that process. And Yeshua of Nazareth will be another. The pattern has been laid. He must follow the pattern. If he is Mashiach, he must follow the Mashiach pattern. And the Mashiach pattern has two comings. The first coming that appears to end in death and disgrace or some level of banishment. But the second coming which comes forth in its glory. So this is the season of Mashiach arising. Joseph has been in prison. Joseph has been banished. His first coming was a failure. He is hated by his brothers. He was rejected. He was refused. He was punished. He was beaten. He was thrown into a pit, a hole, a grave. And he now is coming forth from that dungeon, the channels of the dungeon he went through. I want to talk for the last few minutes. I don't want to spend as much time as I used to spend as I'm still recovering. But I want to talk for just a few more minutes about some of the things that this parsha means to us. The first thing is, what do we need to really know about the beast? If we're going into the future, if we're going into the treasure chest, if we're going into the what do we really need to know? I know other people have got lots of stuff to talk to you about the beast. But what do we really need to know? What does Torah think we really need to know? What does the creator of the universe think we really need to know about the beast so we can deal with him, so we can recognize who it is, so we can respond to what he does, so we can navigate through the channels as he's being driven through the channels himself. Now, the first thing we need to know about the beast, I'm going to label it his nature and characteristics. I don't want to go too deep in this because I don't have time. And I want us maybe to discuss this as part of our discussion time later, but I just want to throw this out to you is, do you even know the nature and the characteristics of the beast? They're given to us in many places in Torah. In the whole story of Pharaoh and the various pharaohs, dealings with Israel, dealings with Bnei Israel, beginning with Joseph and on through, we're going to see the characteristics begin to be revealed. I'm not going to go through them. I will just start where I left off. The one thing I did say is, he will not come when he is called. Beyond that, we'll discuss it at a later time. The second thing, beyond his nature and his characteristics, is, do you understand the source and the extent of his power base? He's the lead cow, so he's going to have followers. He's going to have people who believe in him, who follow him. Have you ever watched cows go follow the bell cow? They stay in step. Most of them, some of them get distracted and wander off, but basically they stay in step. They just follow after the lead cow. Doesn't matter what he does. He does what cows do. She does. They still keep walking in the same pathway. That is the first thing to understand, is you're going to find that there are many people who are enamored with the beast. Many people who think this is the new way, this is the better way. This is like the Hellenists of the time of the Maccabees, of the Hanukkah story. They actually thought, well, the Greeks got it right. The Romans, later we have the same problem whenever Yeshua's alive. The Romans, they seem to have it all right. They're the powerful people in the world. They're the ones who seem to have all the authority, and they've got all the new stuff, the modern stuff, the progressive stuff. We want to follow them. So I just want to talk to you briefly about that. And you need to understand that basically they will follow after him. I call it the chain of fools. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I mean to, with sadness in my heart and hopefully in yours as well. Just understand that what you're dealing with is not horrible, evil people. What you're dealing with is a chain of fools. They have adopted, accepted folly, thinking it's wisdom. They have taken on, and they're brainwashed. They're not hopelessly evil. Please quit seeing other people in this world as hopelessly evil. No creation of the creator of the universe is hopelessly evil. What they are is brainwashed. What they are is trained, force-trained to behave and think and speak and act in a certain way and react and respond in a certain way. And the way is the way of the flesh. The flesh. Now, we'll talk about the flesh in a few moments, but it's just his minions will be many, but they will just be, sadly to say, a chain of fools. Our job is to find those who get distracted, like the cows who I told you were following the bell cow. Some get distracted by the grass along the way. Some get distracted by events or circumstances along the way. One or two stragglers, one or two, out of these that some call it despicably evil. Bring them out. Give them another chance. Give them another opportunity. That's our calling. Well, this chain of fools is like unto the enemies that we've always had. They sound a lot like Ishmael. They have every man. Their hand is against every man's hand. They're wild donkeys of men. That's what we think. But really, they're just our brothers that have been deceived. They're really just our brothers who have been brainwashed, who have been trained by the adversary to walk in these ways. So they're like Lavan. They're like Esau. They're like the Hellenists. They're like the New World Order people. They're just a chain of fools. Love them. Never hate them. Never give up on them. Understand and be wise as serpents, even as you're harmless as doves in relation to them. So we've talked a little bit about his nature and characteristics, the beast, that is. We've talked about the source and extent of his power base a little bit. I want to talk about the things that you really need to know, which is his and his power base's vulnerable Achilles heel. The Pharaoh never wins. The beast never wins. They have a vulnerability that the Holy One knows about. And if we know about it, we can use the same ways of dealing with the beast. But the covenant requires you to be alert and awake and not to be caught up in all of his drama. So here's the power, the vulnerable Achilles heel. He is driven by the flesh. Are you? To what extent are we? He is so driven by the flesh that he cannot be driven by anything besides the flesh. This is like Yaakov understood Esau. Yaakov understood that you just put a bowl of red stew in front of Esau and nothing else matters to him. In Genesis chapter 1, the Holy One gives us the song of the creation story. I'm getting back to where I'm going, but don't. I want to tell you how this works. And in Genesis chapter 1, he goes through the 7 days of creation. And on the 6th day, he created the beasts of the earth. And then on the 7th, and he also later created man, and he said, many things, but you will have dominion over the beasts of the earth, the beasts of the land. And then the next thing he starts talking about is, I have given to you as food to eat everything that grows on the face of the earth, everything, all the greenery. And I have also given that which is food to the beasts. Now he told us how to take that we're to take dominion, and then he told us how to take dominion. If we're in control of his food, if you're in control of the cow's food, if you're in control of the dog's food, if you're in control of any animal's food, they now are under your authority. That is what it means. That's the whole story of Genesis 1. Well, part of the story of Genesis 1. So understand this. If we're going to be able to navigate around and deal with the beast, we need to understand the food supply. And we understand what moves him, what motivates him, what angers him, what brings out his violence and his rage, his outrage. Everything you see today on the news is beast material. What am I outraged about today? What am I offended about today? What am I sad about? What am I sentimental about today? These are the markings of the beast. Now, how do we deal with it? You have to deal with his different flesh problems. So the flesh is never, here's the deal. This is why the Holy One used Paul to say, those who are led by the Spirit are the sons of God. And if you are led by the flesh, you cannot please God. There's this differential between that which is the Spirit-led and that which is of the flesh. Now here's the secret to know about the flesh and the people who are motivated by the flesh. The flesh is never, ever able to discipline its own appetites, urges, drives, desires, and passions. The flesh simply cannot. This is the Achilles heel. Once it starts, it's going to work its way through. So if you know this is going to happen, you get out of the way when you see the flesh operating, or you begin to manipulate the food supply in a certain way to make that happen. Second of all, the other aspect, one aspect of the flesh, which the Greeks and the Romans and their progeny have all bought into in American Western culture, for that matter, is the part of the flesh that looks like intellect, that looks like knowledge, that looks like education, that looks like information, that looks like truth. I call it the pseudo-intellectual part of the flesh. And so we have the flesh, which is just the desires, the base, animalistic, beast-like activities, the urges of human. You've got hunger for food, you got hunger for prestige, you got hunger for relationship, you got hunger for sexuality and reproduction and sentiment. You got hunger for all these things. But now we got the pseudo-intellect. And the pseudo-intellect has one characteristic. It always demands to be right. To think it's right. To think what it says is truth. To declare what truth is. This is the pseudo-intellect. So understand that the beast is going to always operate in the pseudo-intellect as well. And he's going to tell you what's right, what's better, what's best. He's going to declare truth to you, and he's going to enforce that you believe or agree with his truth. The third thing is, but the pseudo-intellect, here's the thing. The Achilles heel is that the pseudo-intellect always, invariably, it never changes, always thinks folly is wisdom, and wisdom is folly. That's how you tell. We are to walk in what? We walk in wisdom. Why do we walk in wisdom? Because wisdom calls to us. Get wisdom. Get wisdom. Where does wisdom come from? Only one source. The Holy One himself. His ways and his words. We can't get it from the world. We can't get it from education. We can't get it from information. We can't get it from training. We have to get it from the Holy One himself and his Mashiach. So we will follow the ways. The pseudo-intellect always mistakes folly for wisdom. The third thing that the beast will do is use ideology to inflame his followers. Now here's the problem with ideology that he doesn't understand. Promoters of ideology have no ability to exercise prudence with regard to either the level of their rhetoric or the level of their actions. In other words, they can't help but tell you their opinions. They just can't quit. They can't stop telling you what they think. Now, the book of Proverbs is trying to tell you, hold your tongue. You don't need to tell people your opinions. As a matter of fact, your opinions are the most irrelevant thing in your entire repertoire. Your opinions are the damage that you can do to the world. But the ideologues, those who flow out of the pseudo-intellect of the flesh, always want to tell you their opinions. So don't argue their opinions with them. Don't go. That just exacerbates the other problems. An opinion is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Don't argue it. Well, that's part of the issues. Promoters of ideology cannot control themselves. They must express their opinions. They must give vent to their feelings. They must spew outrage, and they must expose. In doing so, they always expose their own hypocrisy. They overstate their case. Learn to watch for the overstatement. Don't listen to the bullet points. Listen for where they overstate their case. I hope you can look back over the course of the human events for the past 4 or 5 years, especially the last 2 years, and you see where they always overstate their case, and they always make fools out of themselves over the period of time. Well, this is the idea of the vulnerability. The fourth thing is that those who are self-obsessed, which is what the flesh is really all about, always overplay their hand. They always go one step too far and get a reaction. It cause a reaction against them. A resistance arises, and then they collapse because they're not ready to handle resistance. They just want submission. Resistance, they can't handle. Submission is all they know how to deal with. If you don't submit, they don't know what to do with you. Well, this is the power base's vulnerable Achilles heel. Now, I want to conclude our discussion with this whole story about Joseph now meets his brothers again. After Joseph is raised up, he's given an Egyptian name. He looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. I presume he smells like an Egyptian. But he's Zaphanat Paneach now. He's got his great high-sounding name, and he's had his head shaved, and he looks like an Egyptian, and he is personally taking responsibility for every gram of grain in Egypt. It's outstanding. It's outrageous. Nobody gets any grain except it goes through Joseph's hand. Read it for yourself. I'm sorry. I was shocked this year when I read it again. He did all this himself personally. You couldn't get any grain in Egypt unless you went to Joseph. Well, so whenever the folks from the household of the covenant, the 10 older brothers, are sent by Jacob to go get grain, who do they have to go to? They have to go to Joseph. Well, or this guy called Zaphanat Paneah. They don't know it's Joseph. But Joseph understands Hebrew, and he knows when they're talking amongst themselves, and he hears this. Now, over the course of the next 3 weeks, we're going to see something else that is characteristic of the end of days. Why it's not something to fear. Why it's not something to panic about or be frustrated about or be angry about. Because the miracle that we're going to see is a gradual reconciliation between the house of Joseph and the house of Jacob. All of Ezekiel chapter 37, both the vision of the valley of dry bones and the coming bone coming to bone and all the life coming into the people again, and also the two sticks being joined together. All this is happening right here in this story of Joseph and his brothers. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. But what we have is a glorious reconciliation at the end of the days. At the end of days, that is what we will see. Now, I have told you the arising of the Mashiach figure, the embarrassment and humiliation and defeat of the beast figure, and the reconciliation of all the covenant family of God. That's what we're looking forward to. Put your hand, my little child, my little grandchild, put your hand in the treasure chest. Receive from it, bring it forth back into your life, and understand you were made for times like this. You were made for the Mashiach to come forth in your life. You were made to see the reconciliation of brothers who were estranged and had no hope. Redemption, restoration, reconciliation, these are the promises of our God. And these are the things of life and health and peace that we pursue. Thank you for joining with us today. For all those who are on camera, We bid you farewell at this time, but we would ask you to leave your name and your place of residence generally, and any comment or any question that you may have. I will review every single comment that you give. I thank you for joining us, and I will respond as soon as I possibly can. Blessed are you. We bless you, Lord. We bless you, Israel. We bless you, Jerusalem. We bless you for this season. We bless you for life. Amen.